As I nursed my dying mother-in-law, she confessed she'd convinced her son to cheat, to get rid of me. Her last words: "I didn't treat you well, but I'm about to tell you 2 secrets. Record them and then leave immediately." So I recorded them and left immediately, playing it for the one person who needed to know the truth. Evelyn's grip on my wrist was stronger than a dying woman's should be. After 3 weeks of spoon-feeding her ice chips and adjusting morphine drips while my husband William attended exactly 2 visits, she finally spoke with crystal clarity. "Mary, get your phone. Record this." Her eyes, clouded by medication moments before, now blazed with terrible purpose. "I didn't treat you well, but I'm about to tell you 2 secrets about William that will change everything. Record them and then leave immediately." My hand moved to my phone automatically, years of documenting financial meetings making the gesture instinctive. What I didn't know was that the next 43 minutes would destroy my marriage, send my husband to federal prison, and free me from a deception that had stolen 7 years and $347,000 of my life. But 3 weeks earlier, before the hospice, before the confession, before my world revealed itself as an elaborate performance, I had been living what I thought was an enviable life. That morning, like every morning for 15 years, I woke at 5:30 a.m. to prepare William's breakfast exactly as his mother had taught me. Scrambled eggs with fresh chives from our garden, whole wheat toast cut diagonally, black coffee in the ceramic mug from our honeymoon in Portland. The routine had become so automatic that I could perform it while reviewing client reports, my hands moving through familiar motions while my mind traced financial irregularities through corporate spreadsheets. William came downstairs at 6:15, precisely on schedule, his phone already pressed to his ear. "Hong Kong markets," he mouthed, pointing to the device while grabbing his coffee. This had become our morning communication. Gestures and whispered words while international calls consumed his attention. He ended the call just long enough to kiss my forehead, a brief press of lips that felt more like punctuation than affection. "Don't forget about Sunday dinner at Mother's," he said, already scrolling through emails. "She mentioned wanting to discuss the Davidson investment opportunity with you." Evelyn's monthly dinners had been a fixture of our marriage since the beginning. Every first Sunday, I drove 40 minutes to her sprawling estate in Westchester, where she presided over elaborate meals served on inherited china that supposedly dated back to William's great-grandmother. The conversations invariably centered on William's latest promotion, his investment successes, his promising future at the firm, while my own career achievements were acknowledged with the kind of polite disinterest reserved for children's piano recitals. "Your little consulting business must keep you so busy," Evelyn would say to her garden club friends, her tone suggesting I was playing at having a career rather than running a successful forensic accounting practice. The previous month she had spent 20 minutes explaining to her book club why women who prioritized careers over family were contributing to societal collapse, all while maintaining eye contact with me across her mahogany dining table. What I didn't understand then was that her disapproval was carefully orchestrated, designed to make me feel inadequate, to push me toward decisions that would ultimately serve her hidden agenda. The comments about my biological clock and misplaced priorities weren't casual cruelty but calculated pressure, each word chosen to manipulate me toward choices that would weaken my position in the marriage she was secretly undermining. That particular morning, 3 weeks before her confession, I had important news to share with William. Hartman Industries had returned with an even better offer, one that wouldn't require travel. They wanted me to lead their internal audit division, a position that would double my income while keeping me local. I waited until he finished his eggs to mention it. The Hartman position? William's reaction was immediate dismissal. "I thought we agreed that wasn't right for us." "Not with the fertility treatments starting next month." The fertility treatments. 2 years of appointments, tests, procedures, and perfectly timed attempts that somehow never succeeded. William always had a reason to reschedule, a business trip that coincided with ovulation, a crucial meeting that couldn't be moved. But he spoke about our future children with such conviction that I dismissed my growing doubts as paranoia. "This position is different," I explained. "No travel, flexible hours, and the signing bonus would cover the entire IVF cycle." William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We don't need their money. My bonus this quarter will more than cover medical expenses. Besides, stress isn't good for conception. Dr. Harrison said so himself." Dr. Harrison had said many things during our consultations, most of which William had been absent for. Emergency client meetings always seemed to arise on appointment days, leaving me to discuss follicle counts and hormone levels alone while texting him updates he rarely acknowledged. After William left that morning, promising to try making it home before 10, I sat in our empty house and wondered when I had started accepting his absence as normal. The 4-bedroom colonial we'd bought 5 years ago still felt too large for just 2 people. I'd decorated the smallest bedroom as a nursery 2 years ago, painting it soft sage green with white trim. William had converted it to his home office within a month, saying it was temporary just until his promotion came through. My phone buzzed with a credit card alert. Another charge at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, the 3rd this month. When I'd asked William about the previous charges, he'd explained them as client dinners, necessary expenses for maintaining relationships with international investors. The amount seemed high for business dinners, but William handled our finances with the same confident authority he brought to everything else. Questioning him felt like admitting I didn't trust my husband, and what kind of marriage survived without trust? The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. A delivery driver stood outside with a package addressed to William, signature required. As I signed, I noticed the return address was from a jewelry store in Seattle, a city William visited monthly for what he described as routine conferences with West Coast clients. Anniversary gift, I told myself, though our anniversary was still 3 weeks away. I placed the package on William's desk, adding it to the growing collection of things I chose not to question. The late nights, the weekend meetings, the cologne that smelled different when he came home after midnight, all explained away with reasonable words that I accepted because the alternative was admitting that my perfect life might be perfectly false. That evening, I attended a professional networking event alone, having given up asking William to accompany me. My colleague Rebecca mentioned seeing William at a restaurant the previous week. I waved, but he seemed intensely focused on his dinner companion, she said carefully. Business meeting, I assumed. I nodded and changed the subject, adding Rebecca's observation to the collection of details I was determinedly not examining. The truth was already there, scattered across our life like breadcrumbs, but I was too invested in the destination to notice the trail. 3 weeks later, as Evelyn's grip tightened on my wrist and her confession began, all those ignored signs would suddenly assemble into a clear picture of betrayal. But that morning, making breakfast in my perfect kitchen in my perfect house, I was still perfectly blind to the performance I was living. William's mother had orchestrated it all, and in 3 weeks she would finally reveal the script everyone had been following except me. The call shattered the Tuesday morning silence at 2:07 a.m. My phone's screen blazed St. Margaret's Hospital, in white letters that seemed too bright for the darkness. The voice on the other end was professionally calm, asking if I was Mary Miller, wife of William Miller, daughter-in-law of Evelyn Miller. Each confirmation felt like stepping closer to an edge I couldn't see. Mrs. Miller has suffered a significant stroke. She's in critical condition. Your husband requested we contact you. The drive to St. Margaret's took 17 minutes. I counted them, needing numbers to anchor myself while my mind spun through possibilities. Evelyn was 72, healthy, walked 3 miles every morning around her estate. She had just hosted 12 women for her monthly book club, serving cucumber sandwiches and discussing contemporary fiction she privately despised. The ICU waiting room was nearly empty except for William. He sat hunched forward in a plastic chair, still wearing the charcoal suit from Monday's client dinner, the same burgundy tie I'd straightened before he left. His overnight bag for the Seattle conference, the one he'd packed so carefully Sunday evening, was nowhere to be seen. How did you know? I asked, the question escaping before I could frame it better. Weren't you supposed to be on the red-eye to Seattle? William looked up, his face arranged in an expression of grief that didn't quite reach his eyes. I never made it to the airport. Had a bad feeling, decided to stop by Mother's house instead. Found her collapsed in the kitchen. The explanation had too many holes. Evelyn's house was 40 minutes from the airport, in the opposite direction. But trauma has a way of making questions feel inappropriate, selfish even. So I sat beside my husband and accepted his hand when he reached for mine, his palms slightly damp, cologne different again. Something with cedar notes that wasn't in our bathroom. Dr. Patel emerged after 3 hours to explain the situation. Massive ischemic stroke, significant damage to the left hemisphere, unclear prognosis. Evelyn was stable but unresponsive. The next 72 hours would be critical. She'll need constant monitoring, the doctor explained. Family presence often helps, even when patients seem unaware. William's response was immediate. Mary can take time off. She's wonderful with mother, aren't you, darling? The assumption landed like a slap disguised as a compliment. My 3 corporate audits, my team of 6 consultants, my professional reputation, all of it instantly secondary to Evelyn's needs. William was already pulling out his phone, checking messages while continuing to speak. Mother never trusted strangers. She'd be horrified to wake up surrounded by nurses she doesn't know. It's really the natural thing, you taking care of her. Family duty. Natural. As if 15 years of Evelyn's subtle dismissals of my career had established a closeness that justified this arrangement. As if the woman who referred to my work as a hobby would want me managing her medical care. I have the Patterson audit, I started, but William was already walking away, phone pressed to his ear, discussing market positions with someone in Tokyo. The conversation was over before it began. The next morning, I submitted my family medical leave request and watched my assistant reassign my cases. Rebecca offered to maintain my client relationships, her expression carefully neutral when I explained the situation. We both knew what extended leave meant in consulting. Clients who wouldn't wait, momentum that couldn't be recovered, partnerships that would dissolve into polite professional distance. William visited that evening for exactly 30 minutes, signing insurance forms and power of attorney documents with the efficiency of someone completing a business transaction. He kissed his unconscious mother's forehead, squeezed my shoulder, and left for a client dinner that apparently couldn't be rescheduled. The pattern was established. My days belonged to Evelyn now, my nights to solitude, my career to indefinite suspension. By the second week, I knew every beep of Evelyn's monitors, every shift change, every doctor's tendency toward optimism or candor. The ICU nurses began bringing me coffee without asking, recognizing the permanent fixture I'd become. I held Evelyn's cool hand during the endless hours, studying her face for signs of consciousness while wondering what thoughts, if any, moved behind her closed eyes. William asked me to retrieve some personal items from Evelyn's house. Her reading glasses, specific medications, the silk pajamas she preferred. The estate felt different without her presence, as if the rooms themselves knew their queen had fallen. In her study, searching for insurance documents William claimed were urgently needed, I found the locked filing cabinet he'd mentioned only once before years ago, when I'd offered to help organize Evelyn's papers. The key was in her jewelry box, hidden beneath a tangle of pearls I recognized from countless family dinners. My fingers found it accidentally while searching for the medical alert bracelet William had described. The cabinet's lock turned smoothly, revealing rows of manila folders with typed labels. Investment summaries, property deeds, and then bank statements from institutions I didn't recognize, accounts with numbers that meant nothing to me but balances that made my breath catch. "What are you doing?" William stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He crossed the room in 3 strides, took the key from my hand with gentle firmness, and closed the cabinet with a quiet click. "Mother's finances are complicated," he said, guiding me away from the desk. "Old family trusts, estate planning vehicles you wouldn't understand. It would only stress you unnecessarily right now. You have enough to handle." He pocketed the key while kissing my temple, a gesture of affection that felt more like distraction. We left with the pajamas and medications, the insurance documents apparently forgotten. The 3rd week brought a shift in Evelyn's condition. Not improvement exactly, but a kind of awareness that flickered behind her eyes when I spoke. Her fingers would sometimes tighten around mine, her breathing would change when I mentioned William's name. The doctors called it promising, though their optimism felt carefully measured. That Thursday afternoon, I was returning from the hospital cafeteria when a woman nearly collided with me in the corridor. Designer suit, professional highlights, the kind of manicured appearance that suggested money without effort. Her apology died mid-sentence when she heard the intercom page, "William Miller to the ICU nursing station." "William Miller?" she repeated, her face cycling through expressions too quickly to read. "I'm sorry, I'm looking for the cardiac unit. Wrong floor." She hurried toward the elevators, but not before her purse caught on the corner of a waiting room chair. Several items scattered across the linoleum, lipstick, car keys, and a small action figure the kind boys played with. Spider-Man, his red suit bright against the hospital floor. Wait, you dropped, but the elevator doors had already closed. I picked up the toy, turned it over in my hands. Such a specific thing for a professional woman to carry. Unless she had a son. Unless that son was roughly 7 years old, the age William and I had calculated our child would be if we'd conceived during our first year of trying. The action figure went into my pocket, where it stayed like a question I wasn't ready to ask. That evening, William visited for his usual 30 minutes, signed his usual documents and left for his usual meeting. He didn't mention anyone asking for him at the nursing station. The toy remained in my pocket, small and solid, a piece of a puzzle I was only beginning to realize existed. The Spider-Man action figure remained in my pocket for 3 days, its plastic edges pressing against my palm whenever I reached for my phone. Each time William called to check on his mother's condition, I felt its weight like an accusation I couldn't voice. On the 4th day, Dr. Patel delivered the news we'd been expecting but somehow weren't prepared for. We've done everything medically possible. I recommend transitioning to hospice care. The words hung in the antiseptic air of the family conference room. William sat across from me, his fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm I recognized as his anxiety tell. He'd driven straight from the airport, another Seattle trip cut short by the doctor's call, though his suit looked fresh and his shoes bore no signs of travel. How long? William asked, his voice steady in that practiced way he used during difficult negotiations. Days to weeks. Impossible to say precisely. The transition happened with bureaucratic efficiency. Forms signed, beds transferred, treatment goals shifted from recovery to comfort. William appeared for exactly 2 carefully timed visits. The first to sign the hospice admission papers, standing in the doorway while I sat beside Evelyn's bed, his presence lasting just long enough to establish he'd been there. The second visit came 3 days later when the hospice administrator needed power of attorney documentation. "You're handling this so well," he said, watching me adjust Evelyn's blankets. "I don't know what I'd do without you." His phone buzzed before I could respond. Another Seattle emergency, another apologetic kiss on my forehead, another promise to return soon that we both knew wouldn't be kept. As his footsteps faded down the corridor, I noticed Evelyn's eyes tracking his departure with something that looked like disappointment mixed with resignation. The hospice wing had a different quality than the ICU, quieter, softer, touched with a gentleness that acknowledged what everyone knew but rarely said. I established a routine. Arriving at 7, staying until midnight, sleeping in the reclining chair the nurses had brought specifically for me. They'd stopped suggesting I go home, recognizing the vigil I needed to maintain even if I couldn't explain why. During those long hours, I began sorting through the medical paperwork that had accumulated over the weeks. Insurance forms, medication lists, treatment summaries, the administrative debris of a life approaching its end. It was while organizing an envelope marked secondary insurance that I found the explanation of benefits that changed everything. The document was routine enough. A pediatric visit, diagnosis code for streptococcal pharyngitis, standard antibiotic prescription. But the patient name stopped my breath. Michael Williams, age 7. The service date was 6 months ago. The address was in Bellevue, a Seattle suburb I recognized from Williams' frequent mentions of client offices. My laptop was in my bag and the hospice had guest Wi-Fi. The address led to a real estate listing, recently sold, photos still archived on the realtor's website. A modest 2-story house with a tire swing in the front yard. The interior shots showed a lived-in family home, toys visible in corners, children's artwork on the refrigerator, and in the hallway rectangular tan lines on the walls where family photos had been removed for the listing. "You found something." Evelyn's voice, barely a whisper, made me jump. Her eyes were open, focused on me with startling clarity. "Evelyn." I moved to her bedside, taking her hand. "Can you hear me?" Her fingers pressed against mine, weak but deliberate. Her mouth moved, forming words without sound. I leaned closer, trying to decipher the shapes her lips made. Story. The effort exhausted her and she sank back into the pillows, but her grip on my hand remained. That evening William called from Seattle. Another urgent meeting, another overnight stay. In the background I heard restaurant noise, laughter, the clink of glasses. "How's Mother?" he asked, his tone suggesting he was checking off an obligation. "She's trying to communicate. She seemed very alert today." Pause. The doctor said that's common near the end. Random neurons firing. Don't read too much into it. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of Evelyn's room, listening to her labored breathing and thinking about neurons that fired specific words. About 7-year-old boys with William's last name. About business trips that required overnight stays 3 hours from home. The credit card statement arrived in my email the next morning. I usually ignored them, trusting William's management of our finances, but now I scrutinized every line. 4 charges in Seattle over the past month, none near the financial district. A restaurant in Bellevue, the same suburb as the house in the listing. A jewelry store purchase for $1,800, marked only as retail purchase. When did you get so thin? Evelyn's question, clear and unexpected, startled me from my phone screen. She was watching me with those sharp eyes that had evaluated me for 15 years. I've been worried about you, I said, which was both true and not what she was asking. Her hand lifted slightly off the blanket, gesturing for me to come closer. When I leaned in, she spoke in fragments, her voice like paper rustling. William, not what you. She stopped, frustrated by her body's betrayal of her mind. It's okay, I soothed, though nothing felt okay. Rest now. But she shook her head with surprising vigor. Her eyes moved to my pocket, where the outline of the action figure was visible. How she knew it was there I couldn't guess, but her expression shifted to something almost like satisfaction. No. She managed, then closed her eyes again. That night, unable to sleep in the hospital chair, I researched William Miller in Seattle. Social media revealed nothing. William had always been private about his online presence. But a reverse image search of his company headshot led to a professional networking site. And there, in the background of a conference photo from 2 years ago, stood William with a woman. Dark-haired, elegant, her hand resting on his arm with familiar comfort. The photo was tagged Seattle Investment Summit. Though I knew for certain William hadn't attended that year, we'd celebrated our anniversary that weekend with a trip to Maine. The next morning brought William's 4th Seattle trip in 3 weeks. He stopped by the hospice at 6 a.m. thinking I wouldn't be there yet, but I'd never left. His surprise lasted only a moment before his expression smoothed into concern. You need to go home, get some real rest, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Your mother needs someone here. The nurses. She doesn't trust strangers. You said so yourself. He couldn't argue with his own words. He kissed my cheek, his cologne sharp with that cedar scent I still couldn't place, and left for Seattle and whatever waited for him there. Evelyn watched him go, then turned her gaze to me. Her hand moved toward mine with deliberate intention. When our fingers touched, she squeezed with more strength than she'd shown in days. Her mouth opened, and this time the word was unmistakable. Recording. The word hung between us like a bridge to something irreversible. Evelyn's eyes held mine with an intensity that made the hospice room feel suddenly airless. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting golden bars across her blanket, and in that light her face transformed. The confusion and struggle of the past weeks evaporated, replaced by something sharp and calculating that I recognized from 15 years of family dinners. Get your phone, she said, each word deliberate despite the weakness in her voice. Now. My hands moved before my mind caught up, reaching for my purse, finding my phone. The same instinct that had made me document every meeting, every financial discussion in my consulting career took over. I opened the voice recorder app, a motion so familiar I could do it without looking. Closer, Evelyn commanded, and I positioned the phone on her pillow just inches from her mouth. I need you to understand something, Mary. Everything I'm about to tell you I've planned for months. Maybe years. She paused, gathering strength, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a quality I'd never heard before. Satisfaction mixed with something crueler. I didn't treat you well. That was intentional. Every comment about your career, every suggestion that you were failing as a wife, every comparison to other daughters-in-law, all calculated to make you doubt yourself, to make you try harder, to make you vulnerable. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the bed rail, feeling the cool metal ground me while Evelyn continued, her words flowing with the precision of a prepared speech. 7 years ago, William was getting restless. Men in our family always do around the 10-year mark. His father did the same, though I handled that differently. With William, I decided to manage the situation proactively. She shifted slightly, her eyes never leaving mine. Her name is Elena Vasquez. 28 when I found her working events at the country club. Single mother, beautiful enough to hold William's attention but desperate enough to accept terms. Her son needed stability, medical care, education. I could provide that through William. My throat constricted, but I forced myself to remain silent, to let the recording capture everything. I arranged their meeting at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala. You were traveling for that forensic audit in Chicago. I encouraged William to insist you take that job, remember? I introduced Elena as someone interested in investment opportunities. She wore the dress I selected, said the words I coached her to say. William never stood a chance. Evelyn's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been so cold. But here's what William doesn't know. I've been managing Elena directly. Every month she reports to me. Where they meet, what they discuss, what she tells him about the boy. Oh yes, Michael is William's son. Had to be for the plan to work. Elena was very accommodating about the timing. The Spider-Man figure in my pocket seemed to burn against my hip. Michael. The boy had a name, a face I'd never seen. A father who attended his medical appointments under insurance I didn't know existed. The money, Evelyn continued, her breathing becoming more labored but her determination unwavering, came from your accounts. $347,000 over 7 years. Your father's inheritance that you invested so carefully? It's in a trust for Michael now. Those bonuses you earned working 60-hour weeks? They bought Elena's house in Bellevue. She paused, studying my face with the attention of someone memorizing a final view. The retirement contributions, the investment accounts, even the money you saved for fertility treatments, all of it redirected through the shell companies I established. My lawyer, Harrison Burke, William's roommate from Yale, he structured everything beautifully. Thought he was protecting family assets from a potential divorce. Never questioned why I needed such elaborate arrangements. My phone continued recording, capturing every word while my mind struggled to process the scope of betrayal. This wasn't just William's deception, it was a conspiracy orchestrated by the woman I'd spent 3 weeks caring for, feeding ice chips, holding her hand through the night. The vasectomy was my suggestion, Evelyn added almost conversationally. After Michael was born, I convinced William that one heir was enough. Told him you'd never need to know, that the fertility treatments would eventually be abandoned when they didn't work. He scheduled it during that conference in Boston 4 years ago. You sent flowers to his hotel room, thinking he was recovering from food poisoning. The cruelty of it, the years of treatments, the hormones, the perfectly timed attempts, the crushing disappointment month after month, all of it pointless from the beginning. Why? The word escaped before I could stop it. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. Because you were too much like me. Ambitious, intelligent, capable of seeing through facades eventually. Elena would never challenge William, never question the family finances, never build something that could threaten our legacy. She knows her place. You never did. She coughed, a wet sound that brought a nurse to the doorway. I waved her away and Evelyn continued. The offshore accounts are all in my name. 17 of them scattered across 3 countries. William thinks he's been investing in emerging markets, but every wire transfer went through me first. I kept 30% for management fees. My retirement supplement, you might say. Her hand found mine, gripping with surprising strength. Here's the part that will destroy him. I documented everything. Every transfer, every meeting with Elena, every lie he told you. It's all in a safety deposit box at First National, box 472. The key is in my music box at the house, underneath the false bottom. I planned to give it to William after the divorce, after you were gone, when he'd need my help more than ever. She paused, her breathing shallow but her eyes still burning with purpose. But I'm dying sooner than expected, and you've been so devoted, so faithful, sitting here day after day while my son can barely manage 30 minutes. It seems wrong to leave you with nothing. The recording captured the rasp of her breathing, the distant sound of a heart monitor, the muffled conversation from the hallway. Everything felt hyper-real, like the moment before a car accident when time slows and every detail becomes crystal clear. There's more, Evelyn said, her voice fading but determined. The house you live in. I transferred the deed to one of my companies 2 years ago. William doesn't know. Your name isn't on anything anymore, Mary. Nothing except debt. I had Harrison's structure in case things went badly. She studied my face, seeming to savor whatever she saw there. Leave immediately after I'm done. Don't wait for William, don't confront him here. Take the recording and go straight to a lawyer. Not Harrison, obviously. Someone who specializes in federal crimes, because that's what this is. Tax evasion, wire fraud, conspiracy. Her grip loosened, energy finally failing. The one person who needs to know the truth. It's not William. It's the FBI. Their financial crimes division will find this particularly interesting, especially the international transfers. William may have thought he was having an affair, but what he's actually been doing is money laundering. Evelyn's breathing changed at 4:47 p.m., shifting from labored to irregular, then to something lighter like wind through autumn leaves. I held her hand as her chest rose one final time and didn't fall again. The silence that followed felt absolute, as if the entire hospice wing had paused to acknowledge her passing. I sat there for several minutes, my phone still recording, capturing the quiet that came after confession. The nurse who entered at 5:30 p.m. found me exactly as Evelyn had instructed, sitting calmly beside the bed, no tears, just a woman processing the end of a long vigil. She offered condolences and began the gentle bureaucracy of death while I saved the recording to 3 different cloud services from my phone. My fingers moved with practiced efficiency, uploading to secure servers, creating backups that couldn't be deleted or disputed. Then I composed a single email to Margaret Chin, my attorney who specialized in corporate fraud, attaching the file with instructions to review but take no action until we spoke. "Would you like us to call your husband?" the nurse asked, her hand warm on my shoulder. "I'll handle it," I said, standing slowly, my legs stiff from hours of sitting. "He should hear it from me." The call to William went to voicemail. I left a simple message. "Your mother passed peacefully at 5:30. I'm handling the immediate arrangements. Come when you can." My voice remained steady, professional, the tone I used for difficult client calls. I gathered Evelyn's personal effects. Her reading glasses, the silk pajamas she never wore, the leather journal I'd noticed tucked beside her pillow. Inside the journal's pages I found what looked like random numbers and letters, codes that meant nothing to me yet but that I photographed carefully before placing the journal in my bag. William arrived at 7:42 p.m., his entrance preceded by the sound of rapid footsteps in the corridor. He'd changed clothes since this morning. Different suit, fresh cologne, that cedar scent stronger than usual. His face bore an expression of grief that looked rehearsed, as if he'd practiced it in the car mirror during the drive from Seattle. "Mom," he said to Evelyn's still form, the word carrying more performance than feeling. Then he turned to me, arms opening for an embrace that I accepted because the nurses were watching, because maintaining appearances still mattered for what would come next. "She spoke at the end," I said into his shoulder, feeling his body tense against mine. "The medication," he began, pulling back to look at my face. "The doctors said she might have moments of confusion." "Crystal clear actually," I interrupted, watching his pupils dilate slightly. "Would you like to hear?" His jaw worked silently for a moment before he composed himself. "Later. We should focus on arrangements now. Did she say anything about her wishes? The funeral plans?" We spent 20 minutes with the hospice administrator, William signing forms with the same efficiency he brought to business contracts. He thanked the nurses, shook hands with appropriate solemnity, and guided me to the parking garage with a hand on my lower back that felt more like control than comfort. "I'll follow you home," he said beside my car. "We need to talk about the arrangements, contact the family attorney about the estate." "Harrison Burke?" I asked, watching his face carefully. "Your Yale roommate?" Something flickered in his expression. "How did you—" "Yes, Harrison handles mother's affairs. I'll call him tonight." The drive home took 37 minutes. I spent them organizing Evelyn's revelations into categories: criminal, civil, personal. The theft was straightforward fraud. The offshore accounts suggested tax evasion. The conspiracy with Elena indicated racketeering. Each mile home I built the case that would unravel 15 years of deception. Our house sat illuminated by landscape lighting I'd installed last spring, back when I believed we were building something permanent. William pulled into the garage beside me, and we entered through the kitchen where I'd made his breakfast that morning before the confession, before everything changed. "I need a drink," William said, moving to the bar in his study. "Want one?" I said. "I'll make it." While the kettle heated, I heard him on the phone, his voice low but urgent. "Harrison, it's me. Mother passed today. We need to talk about the estate documents. Tonight if possible. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, each step revealing another piece of the deception. Our wedding photo on the landing. Evelyn positioned prominently, her smile now revealing itself as victorious rather than joyful. The fertility clinic reminder card on my dresser. Appointments I'd attended alone while William knew they were futile. The renovation invoices in my desk. Hundreds of thousands in improvements to a property I didn't own. In my home office, I opened my laptop and began the work I'd trained for my entire career. Financial forensics, following money like breadcrumbs through a dark forest. Our joint accounts showed patterns I'd missed while trusting my husband. Withdrawals timed to my business trips. Transfers labeled as investments that corresponded to Elena's address in Bellevue. 17 distinct transactions over 7 years, each one carefully structured to avoid triggering banking alerts. The Bellevue property records were public. Elena Vasquez, single mother, had purchased a $450,000 home with cash 3 years ago. The seller was a company called EMW Holdings. Evelyn Margaret Williams Holdings. The initials weren't even disguised. My father's inheritance, $127,000 after taxes, had been transferred to a growth fund that William managed. The fund didn't exist in any registered database. The retirement contributions I'd maximized every year showed redirections to accounts I couldn't access. Even the bonus I'd earned last quarter, the one William congratulated me for, had been diverted 2 days after deposit. Mary. William called from downstairs. Harrison's on his way over. Says there are urgent estate matters that can't wait. Of course there were. They needed to secure Evelyn's assets before I could discover what she'd revealed. But they were 12 hours too late. I already knew about Box 472 at First National, about the music box with the false bottom, about the 17 offshore accounts that would trigger federal investigations. I descended the stairs carrying my laptop, my phone, and a flash drive containing everything I'd discovered in the past hour. William sat in his study, a whiskey in hand, his phone face down on the desk. Through the window I saw headlights approaching. Harrison Burke, arriving to protect secrets that were no longer secret. Before Harrison gets here, I said, standing in the doorway, there's something you should know. William looked up, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not sadness about his mother, not grief over loss, but the naked terror of someone realizing their carefully constructed world was about to collapse. He reached for his phone, then thought better of it, his hand freezing midway across the desk. The doorbell rang, Harrison's arrival precisely timed as always. William stood to answer it, but I remained in the doorway, blocking his path. Your mother was very thorough, I said quietly. She documented everything. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Harrison Burke had never been a patient man. William moved to step around me, but I held my ground in the doorway, my laptop balanced on one arm, the flash drive visible in my other hand. Let him in, William said, his voice strained. Whatever you think you know, we can discuss it rationally. I stepped aside, watching William compose himself as he walked to the front door. Harrison entered with the confidence of someone who had fixed Miller family problems for 2 decades. His Armani suit impeccable despite the late hour, his leather briefcase suggesting documents already prepared for signature. Mary, Harrison acknowledged me with a nod that managed to be both polite and dismissive. I'm sorry for your loss. Evelyn was an extraordinary woman. She was certainly that, I agreed, following them into William's study. Harrison opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency, spreading documents across the desk. There are immediate concerns regarding the estate. Evelyn had complex holdings that require careful management. William, as executor, you'll need to. Actually, I interrupted, setting my laptop on the desk, there's something you both need to hear first. William's hand moved toward the documents, then stopped. Mary, this isn't the time. Your mother insisted it was exactly the time. I opened my laptop, pulled up the recording file. She was very specific about that. The study filled with Evelyn's voice, clear and deliberate, explaining how she had selected Elena at the country club. Harrison's face remained professionally neutral for approximately 10 seconds before the color began draining. When Evelyn reached the part about him structuring the shell companies, believing he was protecting family assets, his hand moved unconsciously to his collar, loosening his tie. William stood frozen as his mother detailed the vasectomy, the sound of her satisfaction audible even through the laptop speakers. When she began listing the offshore accounts, Harrison sat down heavily in the leather chair, his legal composure cracking. "Turn it off," William said when Evelyn began describing the money transfers. "There's more," I said, the same words I'd used in the hospice corridor. The recording continued through the systematic theft, the diverted inheritances, the elaborate architecture of deception that both men had participated in, though only one had understood its full scope. When it finally ended, the silence in the study felt explosive. Harrison was already calculating, his legal mind racing through implications and defenses. William stared at the laptop as if it might spontaneously combust. "She was dying," Harrison said finally, his courtroom voice emerging. "Heavily medicated, possibly suffering from oxygen deprivation. Every transaction she mentioned matches bank records," I said, sliding printed statements across the desk. "Every date, every amount, every offshore account. Would you like to explain how a confused, dying woman could accurately recall 7 years of financial transfers?" Harrison's jaw tightened. "Those documents are protected by attorney-client privilege. Not when they document criminal conspiracy." Margaret Chen's voice came from my phone's speaker. I'd called her during Harrison's moment of calculation, letting her listen. "Harrison, I'd advise you to retain your own counsel. Immediately." Harrison's face went from pale to ashen. He stood abruptly, closing his briefcase with sharp snaps. "I need to review my files. William, don't say anything else. To anyone. You're leaving." William's voice cracked slightly. "The estate documents are now evidence," Harrison said, moving toward the door. "I'm sorry, William. I truly am." After Harrison's Mercedes disappeared down our driveway, William poured himself another whiskey with hands that shook slightly. The brass clock on his desk showed 11:47 p.m. In 12 hours, everything he'd built would begin collapsing. "Margaret Chen filed the divorce papers an hour ago," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. "She also notified the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They'll be freezing accounts by morning." William's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "You can't. The prenuptial agreement is void in cases of fraud. Margaret specializes in high-asset divorces involving financial crimes. She's particularly interested in the offshore accounts your mother mentioned." I pulled Evelyn's leather journal from my bag, the one she'd kept beside her pillow. William's eyes tracked it with the intensity of someone watching a live grenade. "Your mother left detailed notes," I said, opening it to reveal pages of account numbers, routing codes, passwords. "She intended these for you, I think, so you could access everything after I was gone." William reached for the journal, but I pulled it back. "The FBI will need this," I said. But I photographed every page. 17 offshore accounts, William. Over $2 million that should trigger some interesting questions about tax evasion. His phone buzzed. Elena's name appeared on the screen. He declined the call, but it immediately rang again. "She knows," William said quietly. "I told her about Mother this afternoon. She'll be worried about the money." "Yes, I imagine she will be. The house you bought her, Michael's private school tuition, the monthly support she's grown accustomed to, all of it frozen by morning." The phone rang again. This time William answered, turning away from me. "Elena, I can't talk right now." He paused, listening. "No, don't come here. That's not—" "Elena, stop." I said don't. He ended the call, his shoulders sagging. "She's driving here. With Michael." The cruelty of it struck me physically. The 7-year-old boy who was everything our children would never be, coming to the house where I'd painted a nursery, where I'd saved baby names in a journal William had never known existed. "I'll be at a hotel," I said, gathering my laptop and documents. "Margaret Chen will handle all communication going forward." "Mary, wait." William's voice carried something I'd never heard before, genuine panic. "We can work this out. The money can be returned. Elena means nothing, she was just— Mother orchestrated all of it. You heard her. I was manipulated too." I stopped at the study door, looking back at the man I'd loved for 15 years. He stood surrounded by the debris of his mother's planning, estate documents he couldn't sign, financial records he couldn't access, a future he couldn't control. "Your mother was wrong about one thing," I said. "She thought telling me the truth would destroy me. Instead, she gave me the key to destroying you." Through the window, headlights appeared at the end of our driveway. Elena's arrival, perfectly timed to intersect with my departure. I wondered if Evelyn had somehow orchestrated this too, one final twist of the knife from beyond the grave. "The FBI will be here at 8 a.m., I said, opening the front door as Elena's Lexus parked behind William's car. "Your partners at the firm will receive copies of the recording by 7. Harrison won't be returning your calls, he's too busy trying to save himself." William followed me onto the porch, watching me load my single suitcase into my car. Elena had emerged from her vehicle, designer heels clicking on our driveway, her son visible in the back seat. She froze when she saw me, her carefully composed face revealing recognition, fear, and something else, perhaps pity. Elena stood frozen between our two cars, her son's face pressed against the window, watching strangers navigate the wreckage of his hidden family. I passed her without a word, though her whispered, "I'm sorry," followed me into the night. 14 months would pass before I saw any of them again, this time in federal court, Southern District of New York, where the full weight of Evelyn's confession would finally deliver its intended destruction, just not to the person she'd meant to destroy. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, its wood paneling and high windows giving it an austere dignity that made William look even more diminished in the defendant's chair. His tailored suits had been seized as potential proceeds of crime, leaving him in an ill-fitting gray suit from a department store, the shoulders too wide, the pants breaking awkwardly over scuffed shoes. The transformation was complete, from investment banker to federal defendant, from predator to prey. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor, Amanda Rodriguez, began. "Mary Miller." My voice carried clearly through the courtroom's acoustics. "Mrs. Miller, I'm going to play a recording now. Can you tell the court how this recording came to exist?" The familiar sound of Evelyn's voice filled the courtroom. Several jurors leaned forward as she described selecting Elena at the country club, orchestrating the affair, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. William kept his eyes fixed on the defense table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles looked skeletal. "I recorded this at Evelyn Miller's request," I explained when the playback paused. "She specifically instructed me to document her words. Years of business consulting had taught me to record important conversations, and when she began detailing financial crimes, that instinct took over." "Did you threaten or coerce Mrs. Miller in any way?" "No. She was dying. These were the words she chose for her final moments. I simply preserved them." The recording resumed, reaching the section about William's vasectomy. A woman in the jury box gasped softly. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keys, capturing every word of Evelyn's methodical cruelty for the permanent record. Rodriguez walked me through 6 hours of testimony, connecting each of Evelyn's claims to documentary evidence. Bank statements appeared on screens, showing transfers that matched her timeline perfectly. Property records confirmed the Bellevue house purchase. Medical records subpoenaed from William's urologist confirmed the vasectomy date. "Mrs. Miller," Rodriguez asked during hour 4, "why didn't you confront your husband immediately after the recording?" "Evelyn instructed me to leave immediately and find proper legal counsel. She said the person who needed to hear this wasn't William but federal authorities. She understood the criminal implications of what she'd orchestrated." William's defense attorney, Marcus Webb, approached for cross-examination with the careful movements of someone navigating a minefield. His strategy became clear immediately. Paint me as the calculating one, the woman who'd manipulated a dying confession for financial gain. "Mrs. Miller, you stand to gain significantly from your husband's conviction, don't you?" "I stand to recover what was stolen from me over 7 years. You recorded a dying woman without her knowledge. With her explicit instruction. She told me to record everything." Webb played portions of the recording where Evelyn's voice wavered, trying to suggest confusion or medication effects. But even in those moments, her recall of dates, amounts, and account numbers remained precise. The jury saw what I had seen, a woman choosing to destroy her son rather than let her secrets die with her. "Your Honor," Webb said during day 2 of my testimony, "the defense contends that Mrs. Miller, a professional forensic accountant, recognized an opportunity to manufacture evidence." Judge Patricia Kenter interrupted with barely concealed irritation. "Counselor, are you suggesting Mrs. Miller somehow fabricated 7 years of bank records, property transfers, and medical records?" or that she ventriloquized this remarkably detailed confession. The defense's case crumbled further when Elena took the stand as a prosecution witness, having negotiated immunity in exchange for her testimony. She entered the courtroom in a conservative black dress, her son nowhere to be seen, her voice barely audible as she took the oath. "Ms. Vasquez," Rodriguez began, "how did you meet William Miller?" "Evelyn Miller introduced us at a charity gala. She said her son needed companionship. Someone understanding." Elena's testimony unveiled another layer of deception. William had promised marriage once Evelyn handled the divorce. She produced text messages spanning years, William assuring her that Mary would be gone soon, that Evelyn had a plan, that patience would be rewarded with legitimacy. He said Mary couldn't have children, Elena testified, her voice stronger now. That their marriage was essentially over, just waiting for the right time to end it officially. 3 employees from William's firm testified about transactions they'd been instructed to process without documentation, transfers they'd questioned only to be told by William that his mother was handling family trust matters. The forensic accountant who'd traced the money spoke for 3 hours, mapping the elaborate network of accounts across multiple countries, all ultimately controlled by Evelyn but executed in William's name. Harrison Burke appeared under subpoena, having pled to lesser charges in exchange for cooperation. His testimony was surgical in its precision, detailing how Evelyn had convinced him he was protecting family assets from a potential gold digger, how she'd compartmentalized information so he never saw the full picture until the recording revealed it. "I believed I was serving my client's legitimate interests," Harrison said, his voice hollow. "I never imagined Evelyn was orchestrating something of this magnitude." On day 12, closing arguments began. Rodriguez stood before the jury with Evelyn's journal, the one containing all the account information she'd intended for William. Evelyn Miller built a criminal empire and put her son's name on it. When she died, she confessed not to seek forgiveness but to hurt the one person who'd shown her kindness in her final days. Instead, she provided evidence of crimes so extensive that her son faces decades in prison. Webb's closing was desperate, focusing on William as a victim of his mother's manipulation. But the evidence was overwhelming. William's signatures on documents, his text messages to Elena, his active participation in moving money through accounts he claimed not to know existed. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with a sheet of paper that trembled slightly in his hands. "On the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of tax evasion, we find the defendant guilty." Each verdict landed like a physical blow. William's composure finally cracked on the 4th, "guilty," his head dropping into his hands. 15 to 20 years, the judge announced at sentencing. Asset forfeiture of everything that could be traced to the crimes. Restitution to be determined in civil proceedings. As court officers led William away, he turned to look at me one last time. In his eyes, I saw the recognition Evelyn never had, that the recording meant to destroy me had destroyed him instead. The court officers led William away through a side door marked, "Authorized Personnel Only," his shoulders curved inward like parentheses around an empty statement. I remained seated in the gallery until the courtroom emptied, absorbing the silence that follows verdict, the peculiar quiet after justice has been served but before life resumes its rhythm. 2 years would pass before I could fully understand what had happened in that hospice room, how Evelyn's cruelty had become my salvation. My apartment overlooked Central Park, purchased with funds recovered through the restitution process. Not the sprawling colonial where I'd painted nurseries and planted gardens, but something entirely mine. 3 rooms filled with furniture I'd chosen, artwork that reflected my taste rather than Evelyn's approved selections. No family portraits watched from mantels. No inherited china waited in cabinets for monthly dinners that would never come. Morning light filtered through windows I'd left bare of heavy drapes, preferring to wake with the sun rather than William's alarm. My coffee maker, a simple French press rather than the elaborate espresso machine Evelyn had gifted us, sat on a counter I'd selected for its warmth rather than its pedigree. The ritual of making breakfast had transformed from obligation to choice. Some mornings I ate nothing. Some mornings I made elaborate omelets with ingredients Evelyn would have deemed inappropriate. The freedom was in the choosing. My consulting practice had not only recovered but flourished. The notoriety of the case, rather than destroying my reputation, had established me as someone who understood financial deception at its most intimate level. Corporations hired me specifically because I'd lived through the very frauds they feared. My client list had tripled, though I maintained strict boundaries now. No evening calls, no weekend emergencies, no sacrificing personal time for professional demands. Rebecca, my former colleague, had become my business partner in the firm we'd established 18 months after the trial. Our offices occupied the 20th floor of a building downtown, far from William's former workplace, far from the restaurants where he'd entertained clients who may or may not have existed. We specialized in forensic accounting for divorce proceedings, our tagline simple: truth in numbers. The fertility clinic had called 3 times in the first year after the trial. Dr. Harrison's office, wondering if I wanted to resume treatments, to use the frozen embryos we'd created before I knew about William's vasectomy, biological possibilities that had become emotional impossibilities. I'd declined each time, not because I'd given up on children but because any future family would begin from a foundation of truth rather than deception. At 42 I still had time, though time meant something different now. The recording itself lived in multiple places. A safety deposit box at my bank, encrypted files with my attorney, evidence folders at the FBI. I hadn't listened to it since the trial, didn't need to. Evelyn's words had done their work, exposed their truth, delivered their justice. What she'd intended as a weapon had become a key, unlocking doors I hadn't known were closed. Occasionally, letters arrived from federal prison in Otisville, William's careful handwriting on envelopes I never opened. They accumulated in a drawer. A dozen attempts at communication I felt no obligation to acknowledge. Margaret Chin had offered to have them stopped, but I preferred knowing they existed. Evidence that William still believed words could undo actions, that explanation could erase experience. Elena had disappeared after the trial, moving back to Arizona according to the forwarding address she'd left with prosecutors. Her son Michael would be 9 now, old enough to understand why his father couldn't visit, why the promises of legitimacy had evaporated with his grandmother's confession. I wondered sometimes if she listened to her own recordings, the voice messages William had left her over the years, promises that must sound different now in the context of conspiracy charges. The frozen accounts remained frozen, millions of dollars suspended in legal limbo across 17 countries. The FBI had traced most of it, but international banking laws and Evelyn's elaborate structuring meant the funds might remain inaccessible forever. A monument to greed that no one could touch. The irony wasn't lost on me. Evelyn had hidden the money so well that even her detailed confession couldn't fully unlock it. Harrison Burke had been disbarred but avoided prison through his cooperation agreement. I'd seen him once at a coffee shop near the courthouse, his Armani suits replaced with off-the-rack business casual, his confidence diminished to careful movements through a world that no longer bent to his influence. We'd made eye contact briefly before he looked away. The shared understanding that we were both survivors of Evelyn's manipulation, though only one of us had emerged intact. My phone rang as I prepared lunch, a client requesting an urgent audit of suspicious transfers. I scheduled them for the following Monday, during business hours, refusing the emergency timeline they'd proposed. Boundaries were everything now. The difference between service and servitude, between dedication and self-destruction. The Spider-Man action figure still sat on my bookshelf, the toy Elena had dropped in that hospital corridor. I'd kept it as a reminder of the moment everything shifted, when coincidences revealed themselves as patterns, when trust transformed into investigation. Sometimes I wondered if Michael missed it, if he'd noticed its absence, if Elena had bought him a replacement, or if she'd used its loss to teach him about consequences. The recording had taught me something about revenge that Evelyn never understood. She'd believed revenge was a weapon you aimed at others, a careful destruction of your enemies through patient planning and perfect execution. But revenge was actually a circle, a force that returned to its origin point with interest. Evelyn had spent years constructing my destruction, only to hand me the tools for William's conviction in 43 minutes of vindictive confession. I poured a glass of wine, something expensive that I'd chosen myself, not from Evelyn's approved list of appropriate vintages. Outside my window, Central Park stretched green and alive, families walking paths I sometimes joined, though always alone, always at my own pace. Freedom looked like this. Choosing your own wine, walking your own path, waking without alarm clocks or obligations to prepare someone else's breakfast. The truth Evelyn revealed hadn't destroyed me because I'd done nothing wrong. Truth only destroys those who've built their lives on lies. Passes through honest people like light through glass, illuminating but not burning. William had constructed himself from deceptions, each lie a weight-bearing wall in the architecture of his identity. When Evelyn's confession removed those walls, the entire structure collapsed. If this story of betrayal and justice kept you riveted until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Mary pressed record on her phone, capturing Evelyn's confession without knowing it would become the key to her freedom. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.